Good afternoon, good morning, and good night. I know it's been a while, but here we are, Chapter 8 of Book 4 of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So long and thanks for all the fish. Yeah, it's been a while, but let's just hop right into it. Chapter 8. Arthur awoke feeling wonderful, absolutely fabulous, refreshed, overjoyed to be home, bouncing with energy, hardly disappointed at all to discover it was the middle of February. He almost danced to the fridge, found the 3 least hairy things in it, put them on a plate and watched them intently for 2 minutes. Since they made no attempt to move within that time, he called them breakfast and ate them. Between them, they killed a virulent space disease he'd picked up without knowing in the Phlegethon gas swamps a few days earlier, which otherwise would have killed off half the population of the Western Hemisphere, blinded the other half, and driven everyone else psychotic and sterile. So the Earth was lucky there. He felt strong. He felt healthy. He vigorously cleared away the junk mail with a spade and then buried the cat. Just as he was finishing that, the phone rang, but he let it ring while he maintained a moment's respectful silence. Whoever it was would ring it back again if it was important. He kicked the mud off his shoes and went back inside. There had been a small number of significant letters in the piles of junk. Some documents from the council, dated 3 years earlier, relating to the proposed demolition of his house, and some other letters about the setting up of a public inquiry into the whole bypass scheme in the area. There was also an old letter from Greenpeace, the ecological pressure group to which he occasionally made contributions, asking for help with their scheme to release dolphins and orcas from captivity. And some postcards from friends vaguely complaining that he never got in touch these days. He collected these things together and put them into a cardboard file which he marked things to do. Since he was feeling so vigorous and dynamic that morning, he even added the word urgent. He unpacked his towel and another few odd bits and pieces from the plastic bag he had acquired at the Port Brasta mega market. The slogan on the side was a clever and elaborate pun in lingua centuri, which was completely incomprehensible in any other language and therefore entirely pointless for a duty-free shop at a spaceport. The bag also had a hole in it, so he threw it away. He realized with a sudden twinge that something else must have dropped out in the small spacecraft that he had brought to Earth, kindly going out of its way to drop him right beside the A303. He had lost his battered and space-worn copy of the thing that had helped him find his way across the unbelievable waste of space he had traversed. He had lost The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Well, he told himself, this time I really won't be needing it again. He had some calls to make. He had decided how to deal with the mass of contradictions his return journey precipitated, which was that he would simply brazen it out. He phoned the BBC and asked to be put through to his department head. Oh, hello. Arthur Dent here. Look, sorry I haven't been in for 6 months, but I've gone mad. Oh, not to worry. Thought it was probably something like that. Happens here all the time. How soon can we expect you? When do hedgehoggers start hibernating? Sometimes in spring, I think. I'll be in shortly after that. Righty-ho. He flipped through the yellow pages and made a short list of numbers to try. Oh, hello. Is this the Old Elms Hospital? Yes, I was just phoning to see if I could have a good word with Fenella. Fenella. Good lord, silly me. I'll forget my own name. Fenella? Isn't this ridiculous? Patient of yours, dark-haired girl, came in last night. I'm afraid we don't have any patients called Fenella. Oh, don't you? I meant Fiona. Of course. We just call her Fenella. I'm sorry. Goodbye. Click. 6 conversations along these lines began to take their toll on his mood of vigorous, dynamic optimism, and he decided that before it deserted him entirely, he would take it down to the pub and parade it a little. He had the perfect idea of explaining away every inexplicable weirdness about himself in a stroke, and he whistled as he pushed open the door which had daunted him so last night. Arthur! He grinned cheerfully at the boggling eyes that stared at him from all corners of the pub, and told him what a wonderful time he'd had in Southern California. Chapter 9. He accepted another pint and took a pull at it. Of course I had my own personal alchemist too. You what? He was getting silly and he knew it. Exuberance and Hall and Woodhorse Best bitter was a mixture to be wary of, but one of the first effects is it has to stop you being it stops you being wary of things. And the point at which Arthur should have stopped and explained no more was the point at which he started instead to get more inventive. Oh yes, he insisted with a happy glazed smile. It's why I've lost so much weight. What? Said his audience. Oh yes, he said again. The Californians have rediscovered alchemy. Oh yes. He smiled again. Only, he said, it's in a much more useful form than that which in, he paused thoughtfully to let a little grammar, a symbol in his head, in which the ancients used to practice it. Or at least, he added, failed to practice it. They couldn't get it to work, you know. Nostradamus and all that couldn't cut it. Nostradamus, said one of his audience. I don't think he was an alchemist, said another. I thought, said a third, he was a seer. He became a seer, said Arthur to his audience, the component parts of which were now beginning to bob and blur a little, because he was such a lousy alchemist. You should know that. He took another pull at his beer. It was something he had not tasted for 8 years. He tasted it and tasted it. What has alchemy got to do? Asked a bit of the audience. With losing weight. I'm glad you asked that, said Arthur. Very glad. And I will now tell you what the connection is between, he paused, between those things. The things you mentioned, I'll tell you. He paused and maneuvered his thoughts. It was like watching oil tankers doing 3-point turns in the English Channel. They've discovered how to turn excess body fat into gold. He said in a sudden blurt of coherence. You're kidding. Oh, yes, he said. No, he corrected himself. They have. He rounded on the doubting part of his audience, which was all of it. So it took a little while to round on it completely. Have you been to California? He demanded. Do you know the sort of stuff they have there? 3 members of his audience said they had, and that he was talking nonsense. You haven't seen anything, insisted Arthur. Oh yes, he added, because someone was offering to buy another round. The evidence, he said, pointing at himself and not missing by more than a couple of inches, is before your eyes. 14 hours in a trance, he said. In a tank, in a trance. I was in a tank, I think, he added after a thoughtful pause. I already said that. He waited patiently while the next round was duly distributed. He composed the next bit of his story in his mind, which was going to be something about the tank needing to be oriented along the line dropped perpendicularly from the pole star to the baseline draw between Mars and Venus, and was about to start trying to say it when he decided to give it a miss. Long time, he said instead, in a tank, in a trance. He looked around severely at his audience to make sure it was all following attentively. He resumed. Where was I? He said. In a trance, said one. In a tank, said another. Oh yes, said Arthur. Thank you. And slowly, he said, pressing onward. Slowly, slowly, slowly. All your excess body fat turns to... He paused for effect. Subcu, subu, subtuque. He paused for breath. Subcutaneous gold, which you can have surgically removed. Getting out of the tank is hell. What did you say? I was just clearing my throat. I think you doubt me. I was clearing my throat. She was clearing her throat, confirmed a significant part of the audience in a low rumble. Oh yes, said Arthur. All right. And you then split the proceeds. He paused again for a math break. 50-50 with the alchemist. Make a lot of money. He looked swimmingly around at his audience and could not help but be aware of an air of skepticism about their jumbled faces. He felt very affronted by this. How else, he demanded, could I afford to have my face dropped? Friendly arms began to help him home. Listen, he protested as the cold February breeze brushed his face. Looking lived in. It was all the rage in California. Is all the rage in California. At the moment, you've got to look as if you've seen the galaxy. Life, I mean. You've got to look as if you've seen life. That's what I got. A face drop. Give me 8 years, I said. I hope being 30 doesn't come back into fashion, or I've wasted a lot of money. He lapsed into silence for a while as the friendly arms continued to help him along the lane to his house. Got in yesterday, he mumbled. I'm very, very, very happy to be home. Or somewhere very like it. Jet lag, muttered one of his friends. Long trip from California really mucks you up for a couple of days. I don't think he's been there at all. muttered another. I wonder where he has been. And what's happened to him? After a little sleep, Arthur got up and pottered around the house a bit. He felt woozy and a little low, still disoriented by the journey. He wondered how he was going to find Fenny. He sat and looked at the fishbowl. He tapped it again, and despite being full of water and a small yellow babblefish, which was gulping its way around rather dejectedly, it still chimed its deep and resonant chime as clearly and mesurably as before. Someone is trying to thank me, he thought to himself. He wondered who and what for. Look to the title. Chapter 10. At the third stroke, it will be 1:32 and 20 seconds. This is my least favorite chapter in the book. Beep, beep, beep. Ford Prefect suppressed a little giggle of evil satisfaction, realizing that he had no reason to suppress it, and laughed out loud, a wicked laugh. He switched the incoming signal through from the sub-Ethernet to the ship's superb hi-fi system, and the odd, rather stilted sing-song voice spoke out with remarkable clarity around the cabin. At the third stroke, it will be 1:32 and 30 seconds. Beep, beep, beep. He tweaked the volume up just a little while keeping a careful eye on a rapidly changing table of figures on the ship's computer display. For the length of time he had in his mind, the question of power consumption became significant. He didn't want a murder on his conscience. At the third stroke, it would be 1:32 and 40 seconds. Beep, beep, beep. He checked around the small ship. He walked down the short corridor. At the third stroke, he struck his head into the small, functional, gleaming steel bathroom. It sounded fine in here. He looked into the tiny sleeping quarters. 1:32. It sounded a bit muffled. There was a towel hanging over one of the speakers. He took down the towel. In 50 seconds. Fine. He checked out the package cargo hold and wasn't at all satisfied with the sound. There was altogether too much cratered junk in the way. He stepped back out and waited for the door to seal. He broke open a closed control panel and pushed the jettison button. He didn't know why he hadn't thought of that before. A whooshing, rumbling noise died away quickly into silence. After a pause, a slight hiss could be heard again. It stopped. He waited again for the green light to show and then opened the door again onto the new empty cargo hold. 1:33 and 50 seconds. Very nice. Beep, beep, beep. He then went and had a last thorough examination of the emergency suspension animation chamber, which was where he particularly wanted it to be heard. At the third stroke, it will be 1:34 precisely. He shivered as he peered down through the heavily frosted covering at the dim bulk of the form within. One day, who knew, it would wake. And when it did, it would know what time it was. Not exactly local time, true, but what the heck. He double-checked the computer display above the freezer bed, dimmed the lights, and checked it again. At the third stroke, it will be. He tiptoed out and returned to the control cabin. 1:34 and 20 seconds. The voice sounded as clear as if he had been hearing it over a phone in London, which he wasn't, not by a long way. He gazed out into the inky night. The star he could see in the distance the size of a brilliant biscuit crumb was Zona Strena, or as it was known on the world from which the rather stilted sing-song voice was being received, Pleiades Zeta. The bright orange curve that filled over half the visible area was a giant gas planet, Cephras Magna, where the Zacian battleship docked. And just rising over its horizon was a small, cool blue moon, Epon. At the third stroke, it will be. For 20 minutes, he sat and merely watched as the gap between the ship and Epon closed, as the ship's computer teased and kneaded the numbers that would bring it into a loop around the little moon, close the loop, and keep it there, orbiting in perpetual obscurity. 1:59. His original plan had been to close down all external signaling and radiation from the ship, to render it nearly invisible as possible unless you were actually looking for it, and then he'd had an idea he preferred. It would now emit one single continuous beam, pencil-thin, broadcasting the incoming time signal to a planet of the signal's orbit, which it would not reach for 400 years, traveling at light speed, but where it would probably cause something of a stir when it did. Beep, 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 he sniggered. He didn't liked to think to himself as a sort of person who giggled or sniggered, but he had to admit that he had been giggling and sniggering almost continuously for well over half an hour now. At the third stroke, the ship was now locked almost perfectly into its perpetual orbit around a little known and never visited moon. Almost perfect. One thing only remained. He ran again the computer simulation of the launching of the ship's little escape boat buggy. Balancing actions, reactions, tangible forces, all the mathematical poetry of motion, and saw that it was good. Before he left, he turned out the lights. As the tiny little cigar tube of an escape craft zipped out on the beginning of its 3-day journey to the orbiting spaceport Cesfron, it rode for a few seconds, a long, pencil-thin beam of radiation that was starting out on a longer journey still. At the third stroke, it will be 2, 13, and 50 seconds. He giggled and sniggered. He would have laughed out loud, but he didn't have room. Beep, beep, and beep. And that's the end of chapter 10. Oh, chapter 11. We are zooming through this. No, that was the end of chapter 10. We are zooming through this. Oof. We're going to get all the way through this. I can't wait. Cheers. I love you all. Good afternoon, good morning, and good night. And have a blessed day. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.